One of the biggest obstacles to the success of the whole space is that so many people watch what VCs say. They absolutely shouldn't, because they're pretty crap at their jobs, most of them.
What would you say to people who are skeptical about XRP?
What would I say? I mean, Fartcoin's bigger than Flare, right? Or it was until like 2 days ago. I know, that's like, you do sometimes wonder what the hell you're doing. I do actually believe in building a mega app on Flare that can control tokens on multiple chains, and then using compute in order to do quite fancy things.
What do you think are the biggest obstacles to your ultimate vision? Excellent. Well, we're here in Dubai. Happy to be with Hugo from Flare Network. The first question I want to ask you today is, tell me a little bit about the original idea for Flare, kind of the inception of Flare, and then what it's grown into today.
Absolutely. So Flare's changed quite dramatically, you know, as we started out. So we started out really as like a couple of people just researching crypto. And we started out looking at consensus protocols, and we conceptualized and kind of did the theoretical work on a consensus protocol that we call the Flare consensus protocol, which we never ended up building. Because it was Avalanche came along and we thought, actually, you know, Avalanche is more or less comparable to what we wanted to build in terms of various attributes. So we never ended up building that. But at the same time, we were thinking, well, okay, if we're building this, if we're building a consensus protocol, what are we doing with it? You know, we're trying to compete with Ethereum. There's a lot of people trying to compete with Ethereum at the time, you know, alt L1s, right? And so we thought, well, actually, there's this vast pool of assets out there that, you know, that are sort of underutilized. Bitcoin, XRP, currently now Dogecoin, you know, large agglomerations of value that sort of should be being utilized more than they currently are. And, you know, should be being utilized in a way that is in concordance with the sort of ethos of crypto, because largely those tokens that don't have smart contracts, the way they're moved to other chains is, you know, suboptimally decentralized, like it's just like not very decentralized.
Right.
And we thought, well, okay, how would you get those tokens into a DeFi ecosystem, but in a way that's decentralized? We thought, well, okay, well, you need a blockchain. That blockchain needs to be able to access data. There are these external data protocols like, you know, Chainlink and Band Protocol and API 3. Okay, but those external data protocols, they're not secured by the same quality of security that you get on a blockchain itself. You know, they don't have staking and all that kind of stuff. And so we thought, well, let's build a blockchain for data, because that's the first step to being able to get those tokens onto a blockchain. And so we've built that, and now we've sort of rolled that out. We're in the process of rolling out the effectively the highly decentralized bridges, and now we're moving to Flare v2, which I can articulate in a second.
Excellent. When you guys kind of were starting out, you know, what was the competitive space like? You mentioned not pursuing a specific angle because of a competitor in the space. Were there many competitors? And
yeah, I think so. So EOS had come out, Solana was just coming out, Avalanche had come out, and, you know, there'd already been several alt L1s. It didn't make sense for us to launch an alt L1 that didn't have a major difference.
Right.
The major difference of Flare is that it has inbuilt, or what we call enshrined, data protocols. And this is the basis of everything we're trying to achieve with Flare.
Right. And then, you know, now we talk about kind of interoperability and bridging, and there's a whole host of people who are working on those types of problems. How is Flare differentiated from these projects?
The basis of all interoperability is data. And our network gets data in pretty much the most decentralized way possible. You stake to a validator, the validator contributes to the data protocols, and the data protocols use essentially the weight of stake to print data onto the chain. and that's to confirm data onto the chain. And so that's unlike sort of most other methods. And then really the fundamental difference between us and sort of other interoperability protocols is we're full stack layer one. So we don't just do data and interoperability. If you think about, like, I used an analogy previously. One of the reasons London as a financial center was so successful is because it was an interoperability protocol. It was an interoperability protocol between the US and Asia. But they didn't just send money through London. They sent money to London and did business in London, right? So we built an interoperability protocol, if you want to think of it that way, but with an EVM smart contract chain, so you can build around that. So, you can route money wherever you like. There's not a lot of margin in that. Actually, you want to be able to do business with that money in the middle of the interoperability protocol, and that's kind of what Flare is.
Right. So to kind of extend that analogy, it's not like, oh, I'm just sending or converting USD to yen or something. I'm actually creating a bank and a financial
and the
layer.
bank's creating financial products and distributing those financial products and derivatives and this and that. And that's why London was for many years, and I don't know if it still is, the world center of FX. But because they had huge amounts of products.
Right.
And that's kind of the analogy I like to use for Flare.
Yeah, it's a good one, and I like the kind of physical and geographical kind of analogy there. That's very cool. You mentioned kind of the V2 vision, and I know that's something you're eager to talk about today. Can you kind of broadly break down what Flare's V2 looks like and why you guys approached it this way?
So Flare's V2 is more interoperability, more data, faster data. So at the moment, the interoperability is relatively, like, it's constrained to bridges. So we can build a bridge with our data protocols. We can build something much cooler with V2, and I'll come on to that when we cover protocol managed wallets. But then faster data. So at the moment, our data protocols require, they have off-chain components, but the way we can use V2, which is all based around TEEs, we can essentially prove data onto the chain in real time instead of having to wait. So for instance, the Flare data connector currently is, I think, 90-second updates. We'll be able to do that on demand. And then the last leg of V2 is compute, which is any blockchain, doesn't matter how much compute it has, TPS, whatever, no blockchain can handle anything that looks like cloud computing. But really, the applications you have in blockchain are kind of still stuck in, the same kind of quality experience that people had during dial-up internet. They're very basic. They don't integrate large data sets. They integrate, like, maybe a price update, maybe something slightly more complex than a price update, but not much more complex. Like, let's say you want to use like a volatility surface for options. Completely impossible to do on chain. Regardless of how fast the chain is. And so being able to apply compute, but safely, and in a way that is as close to the blockchain ethos as possible, so that it's verifiable, is really important. And so these are the three legs of V2, which is, massively more interoperability, much faster data, and highly abundant compute, so that you can build substantially more interesting applications.
Okay. Let's take the first part of that, this kind of idea of interoperability. How do you think of Flare? Is it kind of like Flare's ultimate vision? Is it kind of the base layer and projects like Solana or Bitcoin or Doge have their tokens on top of Flare and are using it to kind of interact with each other in a DeFi application, perhaps?
So I think there's multiple use cases, right? Okay. So like, I know everyone likes to talk in like one simple, clear vision, right? But I think that's not how the world will actually unfold, right? That's not how the world is unfold. When they built Solana, they didn't know that the main use case in 2024, 2025 would be pump.fun.
Right.
So these things can't crop up without without necessarily the inventors understanding them. Protocol managed wallets is a protocol that we're building that, in very short description, allows an application on Flare to secure and transact a wallet on another chain, right? So, but most importantly, only based on the output of that protocol on Flare. So that protocol built on Flare, it can take in data from another chain, it can take in data from Web 2, it can take in price data, it can do some state transition on Flare. And that state transition can then allow that protocol to take an action in a wallet on another chain. That might be that protocol is holding some USDT on Ethereum and it lends it in a lending protocol, right? Stuff like that. So effectively, a protocol built on Flare can interact with other chains extremely safely. And so there's a whole number of things that I think is really interesting once you have that capability. And we already have a couple of RFPs out based around that. We're obviously building our bridges based around that. So we're building a bridge for XRP, Bitcoin, Dogecoin, for to bring those funds to Flare. But I also see that protocol managed wallets as moving very heavily towards chain abstraction, because once you have one app on Flare that can suddenly control and transact on all the connected chains, then as a user, I only need to go to that app to do 80-90% of the business I want to do on chain. It's incredibly interesting.
So it's almost like Flare could serve as the base layer for all of interoperability or all of chain abstraction because of kind of the design features around it.
Yeah, I think, it uses Flare's data protocols. It uses a very robust and probably over-engineered set of TEEs. It doesn't use one TEE. Everyone likes to talk about TEEs, but frankly, most people are throwing like the TEE thing around really easily. If you want to use TEEs, TEEs are centralized. Right.
Let's back up for 1 second. What are TEEs and why is everyone talking about them right now?
Okay, trusted execution environment. They're an isolated chip where effectively no one can read the memory of the chip or see what is happening within the chip.
Okay.
And this is the same kind of chip that you use in your phone that does facial recognition and allows your phone to be used, but when it looks at your face. And so ultimately, what's really important about TEEs from a crypto perspective is you can put software in it and no one else can tamper with that software. And you can verify that the software has run and that very specific set of software has run and it has run correctly. And that's why TEEs are interesting, because it gives you verifiability over software that you either don't want to run on chain or you couldn't run on chain. For instance, give you like a super simple understanding of this. You want to put an LLM in a way that's verifiable. You can't run it on chain. Can't run an LLM on chain, not with billions or trillions of parameters. There's nowhere near enough memory for that. Run it in a TEE. And you can be certain that the LLM that was uploaded to that TEE is the same LLM with the same set of parameters when you go to use it.
So if we think of kind of chains as these trusted execution environments, then a TEE is a way to kind of extend out that environment.
Well, it can be used that way, but only if you design it really sensibly. Because one of the things that TEE doesn't have is it doesn't have decentralization. It doesn't have liveness, right? So we're not using one TEE. When you go and look at projects, most people are using one TEE, right? We're not using one TEE. We're not using two. We're probably going to end up using 10 to 20, of which there's, we could have 50% go down and not have an issue. Because you want liveness. That's what you want blockchains for. You want them for a lack of censorability, decentralization, and that they're always available. And so just using a TEE in isolation, that's not interesting. we're building a TE compute layer, which can have many TEs with checkpoints so that you can have redundancy, so you can have failover, so that if there's a financial application that people are using and one of the TEs goes down, it routes the compute to a different TE, which knows where you are in terms of the kind of transactions you're doing, it knows the state of the application and all that kind of stuff. So it can understand, it can fail over very quickly.
Right. So it's almost it's another component of the network built on top of the existing network.
Exactly. But it gives you the ability to do, huge compute. Importantly for us, because they are secret or that they have privacy, it gives you the ability to hold a private key. So TE can hold a private key, which means that TE can be part of a TE-only multisig, and that multisig can respond only to events from chain. And that's critical, right? So it gives you, our interoperability, the way we'll be holding funds on other chains, that'll be through a conventional multisig method. But it's not like a normal multisig. It's not where me and you call up each other and go, we need to sign this transaction. The transaction can only be signed on a valid output from a protocol on Flare.
So the thesis is almost like we must extend kind of like what it means to be on chain, or these characteristics of why we find crypto networks in general valuable as far out as possible.
Well, you don't want to use a centralized technology and not find a way to make its attributes as close to what you want to achieve as possible.
You guys have recently integrated USDT0 onto Flare Network. Talk to me about why that's important.
USDT0. USDT0 is effectively an interoperability protocol that is built for Tether, and is powered by Layer 0. And effectively, I think, I'd be so bold as to say it's basically the new version of Tether in terms of how Tether is expanding across chains.
Okay.
Looks to me like they're doing it heavily through USDT0. And the critical reason we went for USDT0, there's two critical reasons. One, it's highly interoperable. So you can move it across chains from Flare to Arbitrum to, I think, Corn, and they're building out very, very quickly across many chains. The critical thing for us was we wouldn't have done that because we already had Stargate USDT. That's fairly interoperable, but we didn't, that wasn't sufficient to get us over the line. Also, it's supported by exchanges. So it's not just that, this is a form of interoperable USDT that is great for DeFi. It's also that people can basically use it as if it was Tether, meaning that they can deposit their Tether in Tether on whatever chain supports Tether, but they can deposit their Tether as USDT0 seamlessly on Flare.
Okay. All of this ecosystem, or all of this technology, is in service of basically the Flare ecosystem, right? You guys kind of want to be this economic layer, as you mentioned, kind of a London on which services, applications, industry is built. All this technology is dependent on that ecosystem having value. Talk to me about what the Flare ecosystem is today and what your objectives are on building that out over the next kind of period of time.
Absolutely. So the ecosystem's rapidly expanding. I think we launched USDT on Monday, and I think we're the second fastest growing chain in USDT world. So I think we're about $55 million of USDT 2 days later. So
that's crazy.
Less than 2 days later. And, almost all of that's gone into DeFi immediately. So we got a big DeFi ecosystem, which is growing, again, very rapidly. If you're watching, very nice incentives in order to, bring your funds to DeFi. And really, we launched USDT just now because we're gearing up for what we call XRPFi. So we set out to build this interoperable chain. some of the chains that really need interoperability are, in order to access DeFi, probably the most, viable one is one that has, frankly, at least as large, if not, given the day, larger FTV than Ethereum, right? Like, but zero DeFi or very, very little DeFi, because all DeFi is built for EVM, and there just isn't a DeFi. It's really hard to do DeFi natively on the XRP ledger. So we're gearing up for essentially building a fully fledged DeFi ecosystem for XRP, and that's fundamentally going to be driven, I think, by a protocol that we've funded, being built by another party, that is doing XRP restaking.
Okay.
So about securing services and other networks, so AVSs, through a restaking protocol, but with XRP, issuing a liquid staking token on Flare, and that liquid staking token going into the DeFi ecosystem, so you'll be able to borrow it against XRP, you'll be able to borrow it against dollars, you'll be able to do looped lending, which is a very desirable thing to do in DeFi. You'll be able to use XRP as collateral for loans, for perps, for all those kind of things.
So the kind of concept here, or the goal here, would be to kind of unlock the several hundred billions of dollars.
So that's the first step, right? That's like step one. Like, frankly, we could probably sit back if we achieve that. We could probably sit back and be happy with what we wanted to do. But we do want to go further. I do actually believe in building a mega app on Flare that can control tokens on multiple chains, and then using compute in order to do quite fancy things. So we have an RFP out for, we're working with a group to build essentially a decentralized prime broker for crypto. And what that would do is that would, some functions of prime broker, which is effectively extending margin. At the moment, the ecosystem of DeFi is quite fragmented, right? So you might be on one chain, you may have P&L on one chain, but you can't use that P&L on another chain, right? But in TradFi, if I've got a position in one market, I can recycle a good percentage of those funds to take a position in another market.
Right.
I can't do that in DeFi. I can't do that cross-chain. I can't do that on the same chain but with different apps, most of the time. Sure, there's some bits here and there. How would you do that? Well, you need a risk model. How do you have a risk model? Well, you can't run a risk model on chain, too many inputs, far too much compute needed. But you can't run a risk model off chain either completely, because it needs to be verifiable, because otherwise people are lending against something that they don't know what they're lending against, right? So you need a risk model that sits in a TE layer that is verifiable, and that what the parameters of the risk model are, and that the publisher of the risk model isn't going to change those parameters, and they know what rights they have to change the parameters. Let's hope it's a governance vote, from the lenders. These kind of things. It's like, how do you bring sophisticated DeFi on chain where you need compute, and that compute needs to correspond to effectively be fair on the people that are participating in that protocol in the way that DeFi is meant to achieve.
Right. So kind of another example of like basically Flare eating the world by, providing, maybe what some would call superior technology to other networks.
I don't know about eating the world, but maybe making stuff more efficient. There's so much value in efficiency, right? Like, if you look at like pretty much everything, is the more efficient something is, the more valuable a product is.
Right. You guys have always kind of been XRP aligned, XRP friendly, and with the recent massive success of XRP and some kind of US regulatory friendliness towards XRP, kind of their vision playing out, you guys have been kind of vindicted and also have taken advantage of this opportunity. What would you say to kind of like people who are skeptical about XRP or kind of have negative sentiment about XRP?
What would I say? I mean, most people in crypto have a negative sentiment towards XRP from what I've seen, and I get it. Like, crypto is incredibly tribal. From my perspective, I quite like XRP as an asset. Think it's interesting. Think the use case is interesting. I completely understand why people have issues with the central, what they perceive as a protocol that is less centralized, less decentralized than Bitcoin. I would argue against that. I would argue that, this gets into very sort of religious territory, but I would argue that one of the things that differentiates centralization and decentralization is the ability to fork the protocol when there is a huge disagreement. And the reality is that you can fork XRP. They come to consensus in a different manner,
Right.
and that's kind of like, sure, you can have disagreements with that, and that's fine. But from my perspective, it's the third largest asset, excluding Tether. Or maybe including Tether, I can't remember. But it's a vast asset. It would be idiotic for us, not to build a protocol that served it.
Right. So it's almost pragmatic. Not only are you kind of aligned with the tech or the ethos there, but it's also incredibly pragmatic as an organization to kind of
I want to create something of value. You create something of value by taking something of value and transforming it. Mining oil. It's raw value, and you turn it into a useful product.
Right. How do you view the competitive landscape for Flare? Are you guys competing against Solana, Ethereum, XRP, something else?
No, I think we are fundamentally a utility maximizer of all of those protocols. I don't think I don't think we're really competing with anyone in that market. For instance, we're not competing with data protocols. I could give two stuffs what Chainlink does. We have our own data. We don't need theirs. We don't particularly want theirs. We don't like the way they work. But we're not trying to sell data to anyone. That's not our game. We leverage data on the chain because it's useful to the protocols we want to build. We're not a bridge protocol. We're not an interoperability protocol. We're not competing with Axelar. We're not competing with Stargate. If anything, we'd be augmenting them because we'd probably be using some of those bridges to shuffle money around between a protocol managed wallet that is controlled by a protocol or multiple protocols on Flare to shuffle to rebalance using Stargate. So we're not a bridge protocol. We are a place where you can build incredibly useful applications. We're the only full stack blockchain in terms of data, consensus, EVM, and now compute in the space.
What do you think are the biggest obstacles to your ultimate vision?
Well, used to be regulation, but I don't think that's an obstacle now. Education, understanding. I think crypto Twitter has a habit of focusing on things that VCs are interested in, and things that VCs are interested in are very rarely things that are actually, very few of them are successful. To be honest with you, there's an awful lot of investments that are made and they're not interesting,
Right.
or they don't turn out to be interesting.
Yeah, or they're interesting for a brief narrative cycle and then everyone forgets about them.
Exactly. So I think one of the biggest obstacles to the success of the whole space is that so many people watch what VCs say. They absolutely shouldn't, because they're pretty crap at their jobs, most of
them. What's your ultimate ambition for Flare? What is the...
I want to handle billions, tens of billions of dollars a day.
And do you think that involves like a larger participation, in real world assets and the TradFi industry onboarding, or can that be achieved
We
just
can
with?
handle tens of billions of dollars a day just with DeFi.
Mm-hmm.
I think TradFi onboarding would be amazing. We have some plans there. Don't know if I'll pull them off, but they're very interesting if I do. But I think, like DeFi is a big enough thing for Flare to chew by itself. TradFi would be an insane boost.
Right. Um, you know, I think one thing that exists within the context of data that we talk about in the industry is AI. How does Flare think about AI as an organization? How do you cater to AI networks or agents?
So one of the key reasons we are building the compute layer. So once you've got TEs, you can put AI agents in it. We have a whole strategy that we call Flare AI Kit, which is building out essentially a kit for AI developers, which uses, creates a RAG database for AI, for machine learning algorithms to be able to get good data. The verifiable compute allows you to essentially verify what model you're using. It allows that model to interact with other things on chain. So we're quite AI forward as an L1. And in terms of AVSs that we're interested in, as XRP staking happens, one of the first AVSs I'm pretty sure is going to be a decentralized AI network.
For someone who hasn't ever checked out the Flare network and is crypto native or uses Ethereum or Solana or something, where would you recommend they kind of start to explore?
Obviously, there's our website, flare.network. The Dev Hub is quite interesting, Flare Dev Hub. There's the Flare Systems Explorer, which lets you watch all the data coming in. I find it like endlessly entertaining. There's Telegram to find out what the community's thinking. There's large presence on YouTube. DeFi Llama, Into the Block have a dashboard which lets you see what protocols exist, lets you see where the TVL is, lets you see where the APRs are. And then there's loads of other data providers. You can search for them, just like Flare and FTSO, which is Flare time series Oracle providers. Some of them have full data sets on everything that's happening in DeFi.
What's something that you would be incredibly excited to see being built on Flare that you haven't seen yet, or is in early stages?
For me, it's the prime broker. For me, it's the ability to extend leverage across multiple chains based on a risk model. That's very interesting. But I think otherwise, we have some like very basic gaming. But I'd be interested in someone pulling off something successful in gaming.
Cool. I know you guys are have just unveiled Flare V2, the kind of like current vision for what Flare is going to be in the near future. What about in a more distant future? What would like a Flare V3 look like, or what might that involve?
No idea. No, can't possibly comment. I think for us, it's just about getting V2 out, optimizing it. If we were going to do V3, then possibly that would be, we already have a consensus kind of thread of research. We're still interested in consensus protocols. So Flare V3 might be an upgrade from Avalanche consensus, but that's a long way off.
Excellent. You've been doing this for many, many years now. What continues to motivate you working in the space?
Responsibility towards my community is the first thing. That's very interesting because I didn't build a business. I built a community, and that community is expanding. So I think that's That's like the thing that always keeps you. Because there are times where I think, you know what, crypto's nonsense, and we're not achieving anything here. And it's just like when Pump.Fun took off, right? Like that's quite soul destroying as an entrepreneur in this industry. Like it's like just a bunch of JPEGs, like and like just silly name coins, and like fuck it, fart coins bigger than Flare, right? Or it was until like 2 days ago. That I know that's like you do sometimes wonder what the hell you're doing as a human being if fart coins bigger than like this team of 100 engineers who are actually building something. But what keeps me interested? So there's ups and downs in this space, and it's pretty. I come from TradFi originally. The entrance of TradFi and the increasing number of like actual real financial deals that are happening in the space and the real usage on chain, that interests me and is quite exciting. And I didn't think that would happen when I came into this space, actually. And that's also quite exciting for me because it means that I actually suddenly have way more tools at my disposal because I kind of understand what people are talking about.
All right. So it's almost as kind of these like hype cycles and mimetic and, things are happening that there's this kind of like, subtle drumbeat of this kind of forward progress. And that's taking a long, long time, right? And real world assets still very, very limited on chain. I think there's still a huge amount more infrastructure that needs to be built for that to happen. And that's, again, one of the reasons why we're building this compute layer at Flare, because I don't think you're going to get away with just like the base blockchain infrastructure that's offered today for fully sophisticated financial things to happen on chain. So you think as far as kind of networks go, we're still pretty early?
I mean, I don't know about networks because there's not that much you can change at the base layer. But I just think like, there isn't like a there isn't a sophisticated options protocol in the space. And one of the reasons for that is that, you can't put a volatility surface, on chain. There's too much data. And this is where you need to be able to have, verifiable off-chain compute. So I think there's still like loads of things to do. And that's sort of, people are attacking it with different tools. People are going for ZK. We're going for TEs. They're far broader and about 10,000 times cheaper. So, in terms of cost of compute. So, that's our angle.
Excellent. What's something you're looking forward to with Flare?
We just launched USDT, and there's quite a lot in the bag. I'm really looking forward to launching the XRP bridge. I'm really looking forward to launching XRP staking. That'll be great fun. And I think, the team is very well prepped for it. The team that is building XRP staking, which is not Flare itself, is one of the most interesting teams in the space. They're a huge DeFi advisor. And so I'm pretty bullish on that protocol.
Excellent. I think we're running out of time here, but thanks so much for sitting down with us today and chatting about Flare V2 and your just broader vision for the network. It's been an excellent conversation. Thanks so much.
Well, my pleasure, and welcome to Dubai.
Thank you.